You want to build a project where there's a pretty good chance you're going to end up having to do this one task at some point, and that is fuse two pieces of metal together. Now, one of the biggest things that you'll run into that most often is always happening on these old cars is you're going to have to repair a rusty panel. To say you're going to have to repair just one is usually nowhere near the case. It's usually 5 or 10 different ones. So I wanted to stop for a minute and kind of give you guys let's say a welding basic 101. Now this is a 66 Mustang Fastback, and we have changed a bunch. These cars are prone to the tin worms, to say the least. Now, oftentimes you'll find that this up here, the cowl upper and lower, has got rust in it. It may look okay here, but up under here, there's these big old holes, kind of vents on it. I think both sides, and they always puddle up and hold water that come in through this vent opening. And with that, next thing you know, your feet are getting wet. And guess what happens then? Next thing you know, the floor pans are rusty. Now, we have replaced the doors on this one, and that didn't really require any kind of welding because, you know, you just buy a replacement door. But the floor pans in this thing were shot. Now, at the time, it was kind of when COVID and stuff was going on, and there was a supply issue with buying one giant full floor. And that's what I would have preferred to do, simply because it's one bigger panel. But what we wound up having to do is get a left and a right, front and rear, and then section it and put it in. Now that type of joint has a couple of different styles. One is we kind of did like a butt joint / lap joint back here, and then over there is a lap joint with some plug welds. Now the car is kind of put together with lap joints. You'll see out through the car, and it's not just a Mustang, most cars are assembled this way. You can kind of tell with these little bitty circles here and there, and that's where they use this welding method that pinches the panels tight, and then it fuses the two together. Even back here on the quarter panel, it's done the same way. Now we did put quarter panels on this thing, and we seamed it right here on the top of the quarters, and they look really nice. I oftentimes say there's two types of old cars out there. There's the ones that need quarter panels, and there's those that's had quarter panels. Because rarely will you ever find one that the quarter panels are just perfect. And a lot of times they kind of rust from the inside out. So if you ever find one and it's got rust holes kind of in the bottom or a couple of pinholes around the wheel opening, you can fix that one spot, but in a year or two, you'll have another one here and there. So it's usually way better to just go ahead and cut the thing off and put a whole new one on. Now this car, as I mentioned, had a bunch of metal replaced. It's had quarters replaced, trunk like extension things replaced, tail panel in it's been doctored on, well, lower tail panel, both sides of the floor pans, new fenders, part of the radiator support, part of the battery inner fender thing. The fenders have been patched up, and that's just kind of common whenever it comes to a car of this age. So what are you going to do if you want to fix one up? As I mentioned, there's a good chance you're going to have to fuse some metal together. I would suggest to you guys to get a little 110 style machine. We've got some fancy TIG machines over there. We even got another bigger 220 machine over there. We've got another 110, and we even have a bigger 220 than that one. And you know, a lot of times folks get all worked up on welders and all that kind of stuff, and I kind of get it, but sometimes, you know, people judge you because of the size of your welder. But really and truthfully, when it comes to one of the 110 machines, that thing is capable of welding anything on that car as far as thickness goes. Now, the only thing that kind of would get questionable, and that's if you were welding on the differential, because of the axle tube itself is like 1/4 to 3/8, and that machine may be a little bit close to not being able to weld 3/8. However, everything else on that entire automobile is thinner than that. So don't let someone try to talk you into buying a bigger machine when the little one will do it just fine. Now you're also gonna need a few little cutters and grinders. We got a Ziz wheel here with a little bitty cutting disc on it like everybody's always seen. We've got tin snips galore, and this is just one that I grabbed. And it's also handy to have one with a little buffer wheel on it. You know, kinda, they make that with like sandpaper on it, then they make this one with almost as like a glorified Brillo pad. And then we've got this little jewel. This thing will make light work of doing this type of sheet metal repair when it comes to those pinch welds that happen all over that car. So you're also going to need some metal. You know what I mean, metal. Now at first glance, not all metal's created the same. If you look here, we've got a few different samples laying around here that was just kind of sitting in the floor. And I want to grab this first one. This is one that oftentimes you'll find that is kind of like inducting on the AC systems, that kind of thing. It's galvanized. This stuff has a coating on it that will make you downright sick, and bad news if you try to weld it. It will have this little white fuzzy stuff that kind of comes back on your joint, and as soon as you see that stuff, guys, you need to stop, because it actually 100% will harm you. So if you're ever gonna use any fab work with this stuff, it's always best to like bend it, fold it, rivet it, and screw it, not welding it. Now, some panels on a car have some galvanized stuff on it. Every now and then you'll find a few pieces. I know on them old big body Chevys like I used to fool with, the panel that's between the back glass and the trunk lid is galvanized, and some of the floor. The way we knew that is whenever you'd weld across it, it actually had that little fuzzy stuff. And if you'll ever notice on a car like that, the paint doesn't stick to it. Yep. So in a way, if you're gonna be using some of that electric caulk gun with your welder, you know, stay away from this stuff. Now, you may grab a couple of pieces, kind of like this one, and you're thinking, well, it's actually mild steel. And it kind of looks that way with it having that rust and stuff on it. But the thickness of this one and this one here is pretty much the same, except for this is actually aluminum. If you don't believe me, magnet will stick to the steel one, but it won't do nothing with that one. What this was is sitting out in the scrap pile and had another piece of steel sitting on top of it, and the rust kind of washed down on top of it. So if you're going to be trying to glue it together, well, you're going to need a different type of welder than just that one. You know, you're going to have to change things up. Now with the car that we're building, obviously it's a steel car, so I grabbed a couple of these pieces and we're going to do this little how-to. Earlier I referred to a butt joint and a lap joint. Pretty much a butt joint is where you take two pieces of metal like this and you butt them together, and then you weld this seam here. Now a lot of guys do that whenever they're TIGging, and it makes it really, really nice, and you can do it when you're MIGging as well. But normally whenever you're doing a joint like that, you need to chamfer or bevel your edges. Sometimes you can actually use these cool little clamps that leaves a little bit of a gap in between it for the weld to get in there and fill it up. Now, the other one was the lap. That's where you just take and set one over top of it. And usually that is kind of the, let's say, common practice whenever you're doing panel replacement on an automobile. Now earlier I mentioned to you guys this cool little tool here, this panel clamp. This thing has the ability to squash and kind of step your metal, and that's what happens here in this piece. And then it also has the ability to punch a hole in it for those spot welds. Now I picked this thing up several years ago from Summit Racing, and you can get one of these, and I'm here to tell you, if you're going to be doing very much rust repair on your ride, that thing right there will save you some time. They're really not that expensive. You can get them for 100, 150 bucks. And yeah, I know that's a little pricey sometimes, but if the other alternative as far as getting those holes in there is with a drill. And yeah, sometimes you are gonna have to use a drill, but this thing will do it in a matter of a second, and whew, it will save you a bunch of times. Trust me. But let's do this little lap joint like I was talking about. Grab our air hose. Hopefully I turned it on. And then what you'll do is take and slide your piece of metal in this thing. And I wanted to demonstrate this thing here. You can see that step that I was talking about. And once you go like ka-chunk, man, it steps that piece of metal. It works really, really handy. Now, you can get pretty quick with this thing if you want to. All you have to do is make sure that you lay it in here. You don't want to twist it sideways, because if you do, well, I'll just do one and you'll see it. Your little section is crooked. That isn't what you really want. So what is pretty handy about this thing is if you are off a little bit, you just take it and lay it back in there and let it smash it again. It will normally straighten itself right back up. You can see how it crimped it. Except for my little boo-boo. Maybe I should have done that, but heck, we always screw up, so I'm just like the rest of you folks. Now, what's really handy about that little seam there is whenever you put your other piece of metal up here on it, you have the ability for this thing to essentially like be flush because of that step. Once you lay that thing over top of it, and then you weld it or fuse it together, it gives you a nice strong hold. Now, there are some instances if you're putting a quarter panel on or a door bottom or something like that. Now, oftentimes you guys know if you've ever sliced into one of them things, that panel kind of like curls back. Well, if you put that step in it and you leave that 1/2 inch of the seam, that kind of gives you some wiggle room. You can make your panel, stick it up in there, and then whenever you kind of like push that panel back out to give it the arch, well, it essentially is going to move up in there, and then that gives you that wiggle room that you need. And it allows you to follow those contours, as opposed to if you just butted that thing up against there, man, that can be tough. Just know your skill set. You know, there are guys out there that are coach builders, and they can build you a replica of that car using flat metal and hammers, dollies, tools, and all that kind of stuff. But we're all not that away. Those are the guys that I call like the 1%ers. If you're trying to, I don't want to say patch a car up, but if you're trying to repair it, do what you're comfortable with. And the next thing you know, it's a solid repair and you can move on. Now, with this type of thing, I'm gonna go ahead and set this on here. We gotta glue these together. You know what I mean. There's my marker. So I'm just going to make me a couple little marks here. Now, if you're gonna be doing the pinch welds, you need to put some holes in it. This piece of metal is a little bit thick for what this machine can handle, but after you do it a couple of times, it does its little thing there. You're fixing to lose a finger. There we go. Punch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 holes in a matter of a few seconds. And in case you're ever needing to fill up some holes, you know what I mean? This thing makes the fanciest round little ones. Works pretty good. Before you get too carried away of trying to glue and weld this stuff together, you have to make sure that you prep the metal properly. This stuff has rust on it and it's easy to see. And you want to get that off of there. Now, I'm not gonna lie, now you can put this on there and you can turn that welder up and it will fuse it together. It will bond them together. But it's just good practice, if you know what I mean. Now, we've all worked on some farm equipment that we didn't very much clean hardly anything and we just threw the wire to it. You know what I'm talking about. But you're building something a little nicer. It isn't just a plow. So go this extra mile, plus corrosion will always come back to bite you, if you know what I mean. So even with this type of stuff here, if you were putting it on the car, you may even want to use like some weld through primer or something like that. I need to get some eye protection. 1 second. See, that didn't take that long. And we're not gonna get crazy. And I'm gonna take and run this stepper right across here again, just to make it a little tighter. Oh yeah, that looks pretty good. And once you put these two together, you guys can see what I mean. Looks pretty nice. And those two panels are almost flush. Yeah, this one is a little higher than that one, but it gives you a really nice seam. And like I was mentioning to you guys earlier, if it's off or if you got to wiggle that panel around just ever so slightly, you do have some movement to it, as opposed to a butt weld. Butt weld, you have to be crazy precise. You off just a little bit and you're trying to bridge 3/16 or 1/8 of an inch. That's a lot. When you're like this, man, that's way easier. Let me show you. Just give you a little visual there. Maybe hard to see where you guys are at. That's basically right on top of it. We pull that thing off that much, we still own that panel. Super helpful. So pretty much right now we're ready to glue them together and we need to turn the machine on. So do you know what settings it needs to be? Well, there's a couple questions you need to know. Well, answers. You know what I'm saying. One thing that's pretty handy about this particular welder, and a lot of them are like that, is inside of here, there is a chart. And it tells you what you're working with, and then the gauge or the thickness of the material, and also what type of wire, meaning the size. We're running 24 thousandths, and I prefer using 24 thousandths on this type of setup, because the thicker that wire, the more heat it takes to melt it. And whenever you're working on sheet metal, like that car body, sometimes heat is not your friend because you will warp the panel up. So using the smaller wire means you don't have to melt it as hot, and therefore you don't have to put as much heat into the panel. However, if you're running into some fitment issues, that thicker wire can give you more filler material, and that helps to fill up those gaps. So sometimes you just know those type of information and then you can use it to your advantage. Now with what we're doing, that stuff is somewhere between, it's probably 18 gauge that we're using. So it's supposed to be at 2.5 and 50. Now this isn't the holy grail. This is not what you have to do. Sometimes it takes a little bit of some tweaking to dial it in to perfection. So all we do here, flat back here, flick that machine on, come up here, turn it to 2.5, and then that was 50. And then we should be pretty much ready to start using that thing. We'll just set that over here and then grab your ground lead. Whew. How many times have you guys ever, let's say, tried to weld and that thing not be on? Oh, it's even awesome whenever you like climb into a car and the welder's out here and then you're like wiggled down off up inside of there upside down, and then you go like bzz, and the wire just kind of runs around. You know what I'm talking about. Now, before you throw the first spark, you need to be aware of your surroundings. Look at me right now. Look what's over here behind me. That big old fancy Plymouth. You don't want any sparks getting, you know, rambunctious and jumping out around. So make sure to take a moment and just kind of look around to see what you can see. Now make sure there's nothing like fancy aluminum wheels laying on the ground. Yeah, you burn up a fancy set of wheels and have to buy those, whoo-wee. Man, that gets in your pocket real quick. Plus the wife's all ticked off because, you know, you're having to sell a kidney to buy a wheel. Yeah, it does. Luckily, I still have both of mine. Kidneys, okay, kidneys. Only one wife. Now, you gotta clamp these things together. I use C-clamps, and you guys have probably seen my stash of these things. They're everywhere. Now, you don't have to use C-clamps. You can use other things. You know, there's fancy panel clamps. I got some of those. I need one of them actually right now too. So, grab two of these. Oh, bam. Then we're back with the show. Now you want this joint as tight as possible. That's what you want because of fitment. You don't want it all gapped up. So once you get that thing lined up to where you need it, you can use a couple of these. And then sometimes dudes use tech screws, them little self-drilling things. You can take it, run it in every other one. It only makes a really, really small hole in it. And normally you can pull the panel down tight and then, you know, unscrew that and then weld that little hole up whenever you do the plug weld. Also, you're gonna need some PPE. Now, everybody don't like talking about this type of stuff, but simple things you're gonna need. If you're gonna do a lot of welding, you're gonna need a jacket, at least some long sleeves. It's handy to have some welding gloves. Trust me, you ever picked up some kind of weld joint and you didn't realize it until it was way too late and you kind of singed off your fingerprints? Yeah, just some good gloves and obviously a helmet. Also, it's fancy to have you some cool boots. Yep, cool boots. You don't believe me? You ain't lived until you had a pair of them little old, let's call it, nylon mesh tennis shoes on, and then one of them cool little molten red cherries fall off into your shoe, and then the next thing you know, you're competing in the Guinness World Records for the person that takes the shoes off the fastest. It's just a quick tack. It ain't gonna be bad. And then the next thing you know, you're walking around funny with your pinky toe about half burned off. True, trust me, I've been there. Yeah, whew. I don't like trying to traumatize. Anyhow, I guess it's time to burn some wire. How do you work the wand? How do you do that? Well, let me show you this. Now you got your little old wire that's poking through here. And so for demonstration purposes, we will make a hole. Let's imagine that this piece here is that. Some people start here in the middle, and what will happen is when you're welding, it will generate a puddle. And then once that puddle gets almost like, I'm gonna draw again, so pardon me guys. If you started in there and you were filling this thing up, once that puddle is essentially the height of your lap joint, once it's the height of here, they go around it. And usually it takes like one loop around and then you will fill all of that up. Maybe that helps. I'll show you what I'm talking about. While I'm putting on all this stuff, story time with Tom. Cue the cool graphic. Okay, so this is what it is. When I was in trade school, we had to take a welding class. And you know how them boys are whenever you're in trade school. You're with some characters, to say the least. So the guys that I were with, They were into playing some practical jokes. Well, what they were doing is some of us fellas had welded before and some of the fellas hadn't welded before. While we were starting to burn wire and all that kind of stuff, what we had to do is we took a little piece of metal about this big and we had to just weld beads on it. Some of them were lap joints, some of them were plug welds, and so on and so forth. As you're concentrating, you got your gear on, you're just sitting there burning them old wires. Well, they'd come in with a can of WD-40 and spray your weld from about, I don't know, a foot or two away. The first time they did that to me, I caught the scent. You know, we all know what that stuff smells like. And I flip my helmet up and that thing goes like, whoosh, and I'm like, oh, guys, really? The guy one thing up from me, he didn't catch on there as quick. So they hit him with that thing and it went whoosh up around his helmet. And this dude like freaked out, guys. I ain't kidding, this fella about lost his mind. So then they come in, you know, they kind of embrace this. They say, man, dude, you gotta make sure you adjust that welder because it's too hot, man. You gotta, man, that thing's shooting flames like that. You gotta be careful, it could blow up on you. So he's over here messing, screwing with this thing. He goes to welding. By now, it's not welding for crap, you know what I mean. It's spitting and sputtering and he's getting mad. They're also, every now and then they'd come in and go, just a little bit, and he was all worked up, and then it escalated. They come in with a ball peen hammer and that WD-40, and two of them. One hits the bottom of his chair, kaboom, as the other one is spraying, and it goes, you know what happened. That fireball reached up around his head, that seat jarred and boomed like it did. This fella flung his helmet, welder lead, jacket and all, and struck out right out of the door. It was like his hair was on fire. There was 3 or 4 or 5 fellows over here rolling in the floor, and luckily for me, I had a front row seat to watch all this happen. Now it's also super handy to do this little setup right here, guys, if you're actually about to, you know, weld on a panel. This is kind of like your test fit. You can dial in your machine, get everything set just like you like before you actually try to bond that panel on there. This is kind of your practice run. And it's, man, I really like to do it. So hopefully this goes well. We may have to dial it in, but we don't know until we try. Aha, first thing. I remember turning the gas on and it was off. I know. See? Practice run. Not the best. Not the worst, but not the best. Let me show you how I screwed up. And kick this over here that way. And if you'll notice, I left a pinhole in it. That's not what you want. Also, my weld is a little bit fat. You see how it's humped up? And normally what you want is that weld to be flush with the top of your piece of metal here. Now, if your heat was too hot, you'll also notice that it droops down here on the bottom. Ours looks pretty nice. It's not really falling through, so I think we're pretty good as far as heat range, and that could be just simply me hanging out with the welder too long, meaning I made too many loops. So we'll have to practice it here on the second one. I left another hole, but it's flatter. Now you can come back and fill that thing in, but it's gonna look like you filled it in. Let me show you what I'm saying. See, looks like you welded it twice. I think what I actually wanna do is I wanna turn my heat up on my welder just a little bit because I want it to burn in better. Because while I'm trying to loop it around there, it's kind of like, it feels like it's a cold weld. So I think if I turn my heat up just a taste, it will make it flatter and be exactly what I'm looking for. So you could do it two ways. You could kind of slow down your filler material, or you could turn the heat up. Which one? Let's slow down the material instead of cranking the heat up. Now we're at like, what is that? Say 48. Let's go, yeah, let's try that. Punched a few more pieces. We get to try it again. I actually dialed my welder up to number 3. And we're gonna see if that extra heat gets us what we need. But I just gotta make sure that, you know, that I actually fill all the hole up. Rookie, no judgment. Whoop, that's too hot. We're actually too hot and wire speed's too low. If you guys notice from the way that welder was sounding, that hiss wasn't what you want. You want it to sound like bacon frying. I'm gonna turn my wire speed up to where it was, that 50 mark, and my temperature is up to 3. Try it again. That's that good hiss that you're looking for. Oh yeah, that one's pretty good. Except for I burned through the edge ever so slightly. You'll notice right there on the top, I don't want to touch it. You can see where it's got that little bitty divot right there. So yeah, that's where I kind of took the wand and got a little close to the edge. But when you pull it over here, it's really not that high. When you get those kind of ant mounds of welds on there, what that runs into is excessive amount of grinding. I want to see if I can just practice once or twice again here to see if I can kind of get some nice looking spot welds here. Man, I need to oil my pliers. Finally, got one. Knew we'd get it. That's pretty much what you're looking for. Now we do have a pretty good heat ring, but that's basically because I came right after this one and hit that one. And if you'll notice, man, I'm getting really good at losing or missing that little bitty spot on it. So after getting a little closer to it, it looks pretty nice. You don't have a whole lot of bubble in it, if any. Not anything hanging under the bottom, but you can tell that we did get penetration. You can see that we got the good penetration. There's nothing protruding out of it on both of those. So that's what you're looking for. If you did have that, that just means that you're way too hot and you need to dial the machine back. That took a little longer to get to than I was anticipating, which is okay. Heck, it's been a minute since I'd actually burnt wire like that. So I'm not judging myself. Y'all welcome to judge me. But that's what's great about one of these little old MIG welders. And you can spend about an hour playing around with that thing, and next thing you know, you're laying some pretty good beads. Now the next step on something like this would be kind of metal finishing out. What would you want to use? Well, I like to use a little different, let's say, sanding pad instead of that buffing pad, or, you know, let me go grab one. We keep a lot of them old ones because if you notice, we've got a 2-inch little pad here, and these are actually a 3-inch. So what we do is we save them and then we cut them down to be a little cost effective, because a lot of times this outer edge gets wore off, but that inside still got a little grit to it. And they make them in multiple different grits. You can get them in like 36, 40. I think you can get them in 50. You can get them in 60, 80. Now, when you're doing metal work like that, you're going to need one that's got a little bit of some bite to it. So I'm going to grab basically this one. I think that's a, well, what are we going to get? Let's see one. This one's a 50. And as you can tell, it's kind of gnarly here around the edges. So to save a little monies, you can take these cool little 10 snips and you trim this dude down. Now it's handy if you're a little better at, you know, kindergarten class than I was, and is actually round instead of semi-square, semi-round, but you guys get the point. Then put on some eyeglasses. Let's mow this thing down to see what it looks like. Still a little warm. I'm gonna put my gloves back on. Now, if all goes well, and those aren't too big, it doesn't take much to knock them down. Just a couple quick little wisps. You can see how odd that thing is shaped there. We're gonna trim her down, true her up a little more, just because it is odd right now. Using our rubber pad on here as a guide, it should help it not be so violent. Man, that is just ugly. Sometimes saving money ain't pretty. Except for in my wallet. Oh yeah. See, that looks pretty good. That only took a few seconds. Also, if you'll pay attention, that thing's throwing some good spark for a wore out disc. And you can see really easy those 3 little holes that we left whenever we were making those plug welds. I want to sew them up, re-grind this down, so it can basically be as a finished panel. Then you can come back with one of these other ones that's not nearly as aggressive. Kind of blend that out a little. Look at that. That's not too shabby. After a little bit of welding, a little bit of grinding, looks pretty good. Pretty good. We can flip it around here for you to see the other side. That's nice and tight with your seam there. That's one thing that you're looking for. It's a little bit of a shadow on it, but that's because of the square, the corner that's in there. But looks pretty good. Now this little exercise has been pretty fun. I hope you guys may have learned something or you seen something that kind of tickled your fancy. Now it took me a little bit to get all this stuff together and then kind of get everything set to where I wanted it. But you know, this practice run has me now set up. If I needed to put on a panel, I'm ready to go. But I'm going to urge you guys to kind of get after your projects, kind of do these little things like this, because next thing you know, you're going to be one step closer to riding in that thing. And guys, I want to stop for just a minute and also say thank you for what you're doing for me. You guys clicking that subscribe button, well, it's sure pushing us back toward the top. And I want to say, if you have something that you saw in here that you had questions about or you enjoyed, leave me a comment. And make sure to share the news, guys. If you can share to everybody you know that we're doing this thing now out on our own, well, it sure will help us as well. So, y'all know the next line. Y'all keep it between the ditches. I got a Hemi and a Mustang I got to work on. Yeah, that is a Hemi.